All right, everybody, it's Dr. Eric, the fitness physician, and I have another awesome episode of the Relentless Vitality podcast. I'm super excited to have an amazing guest. I've been looking to get on the show for a while. His name is Dr. Bill Campbell. He's a professor of exercise science and the director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory in the beautiful area of Florida. We were just talking about the University of South Florida. So he's a PhD in exercise, nutrition, preventive health, and he's done a ton of research, written tons of publication. I'm let him tell you all his accolades. It's probably too long for me to list, but the coolest thing he's got going is something I get myself in 2022. Launched his Body by Science research review to help people optimize their physiques, and he's doing all kinds of research and studies with his graduate students, with actual patients and clients down there in beautiful Florida. So Bill, welcome to the show, my man. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, man, let's just jump right into it, man. I know you're obviously physique enhancement. You talk about obviously everything related to muscle, fat loss, which is right up my alley. I like to do what I call health and performance optimization and muscle medicine. I really like to focus on muscle. I think I do a lot of weight loss, but I try to focus on building up, right? Building that muscle up, because that kind of takes care of everything else. So I kind of call it muscle medicine. It's such an important endocrine organ. It does so much for your body. So love to get your take on. People I think want to know, of course, the basic stuff. And we're talk about, I guess, muscle growth and fat loss, probably things you get asked about a lot, but I have a few different questions to ask you. But I guess in terms of what you're working, I know you told me a little bit about what you're working on now. I guess the biggest thing, let's talk about, I guess we could start with fat loss. I guess I know you've done a ton of studies on this, and you've talked about this on many podcasts. Maybe we could like where to start, I guess, with people. I know I don't know about you, but I get a lot of clients who are like, well, I know I need to eat less, I need to do this, but like I don't want to track, I don't want to do all these chronometers and this and that. So like, how do you determine, like when you start with a brand new patient, man or woman, like where do you start with when they look, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to get in shape? Like where's your starting point? And we could talk about diet, we could talk about exercise, and wherever you want to run with it.
Yes, one thing, I'm spoiled because I'm a researcher. I deal with subjects, and the subjects they have to do what we tell them if they want, right? Yeah. Otherwise we drop them from the study. So
right,
from that aspect of my life, there is no give or take. It's I'm the researcher, you're the subject. This is what you do if you want to be in the study. When I work with clients, I'll say I have an appreciation for people who don't want to do any tracking or use any of the gadgets. And I don't like gadgets either. Now I use a tracking app for my calories, but that's pretty much it. So I appreciate people who say, yes, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to count my calories. And my response would be, then I'm not the person for you. So you mentioned Body by Science. I'm a scientist. So that means I kind of gravitate towards numbers and data. And I would just direct them to my network of coaches who are much better suited to help somebody in that. So I don't think every coach can help every client in the fat loss goal the best. We're going to all have our unique situations. So I guess a short answer is, let me direct you to somebody else who can help you with more intuitive approaches. But if you're trying to get to treat your body more like an experiment, then I would be a good person to work with you. Now, let me just say, I don't have clients. I don't work with clients, but that's how I would approach it. I want you to have data, and then you can base decisions on that data that I helped you get, that you can feel good about. So maybe that's rude, maybe that's being honest, but that's what I would do.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I think from listening to you talk before, if you have a brand new client or someone who's interested in losing weight, you typically start more with diet, a little bit of exercise, basic routines, a little bit of both, and kind of where do you start in terms of like a deficit? I think I mentioned like in the 20-25% range of a deficit, then plus minus adding some exercise, or adding that on later. Like how do you approach that with your subjects and your studies?
Yeah, so in that case, I would want to know where what have they been doing? Have they been exercising? Have they been dieting? So let's just say that somebody said, I don't really want to go on a diet, but I would like to lose body fat. Well, I actually have an evidence-based answer for that. We can increase your protein and reduce some of your carbs but your calories stay the same. So you're not dieting at all. And that change alone will change your body composition. Multiple studies have reported that in humans that are well-designed studies.
Nice.
So I love that from the sense that, okay, we're going to change your body by doing nothing but then just having you understand what protein is. Again, this would be for a beginning client or somebody that's new to nutrition or new to fitness. So there's that's like low-hanging fruit.
Right.
As long as they're able to increase protein.
Right.
And then just reduce some carbs. But yeah, I would typically start with diet, and then because that's going to give you the largest that you're going to get better results more quickly from reducing calories. Now, it is my hope in terms of exercise that people engage in both modes, resistance training. And I always explain that as that should be like the heartbeat of your fitness life. Like you should be resistance training today, tomorrow, next year, 20 years, 40 years. I know you're an actual physician that prescribes drugs, but I always describe resistance training. It's like the best anti-aging drug that exists. I don't know what it is or why it is, but when you look at people who are older and they look younger, they always lift weights. So ideally they're lifting weights. And then ideally there's a base level of cardio just for metabolic health. And then I would strategically increase that at times when fat loss is the goal. So that would be a little bit more variable. Resistance training is a staple. And again, reducing calories, cardio, variable based on their fat loss goals at the time.
Perfect. Yeah, I know. I totally agree with you about the exercise. I'm very adamant with my clients about you got to lift weights, you got to move. That's, I try to do the free stuff first, eat right, exercise, sleep, the basics, right?
Yeah, yes.
What do you have a recommended kind of like, do you set up or advise like a rate of fat loss per week, or do you, or going fast right out of the gate, or more of a gradual drop over time? I know what do the studies show? I mean, I've looked at some of this a little bit, but I'm sure you know this better than I do.
Yeah, I typically have had the opinion based on the evidence that kind of a moderate caloric deficit is best. And that I would define that as reducing your calories by about 25%. That's enough of a caloric deficit to induce fat loss. And it's not so severe that you're going to lose a lot of lean tissue. So that's a sweet spot. And what we found in our lab that we've ranged from 20 to 25, and we've done some other studies that were more aggressive, but around 25%, where we're prioritizing protein, like 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kg of protein, or that would be about 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. And so you get that much protein and you reduce your calories by 25%. In our lab, that's been shown to have almost all of the weight loss come from body fat stores, which is really what we want.
Right.
So that that would be the general approach. And you did mention more aggressive. So I'm literally, the way I've been describing this, I'm literally in a transformation stage of changing my mindset on rapid fat loss. So historically avoid them. And I think that's still true most of the time, but we did a rapid fat loss study in my lab. We're hoping to submit this in the next couple of months for publication. And that forced me to look at, why did I have that opinion? And I think what I've learned is our data made me look at things a little differently, such that now I would say, depending on the patient, client, or subject in my case, depending on the person, I think there's a lot more nuance to when a rapid fat loss diet could be positively recommended. And I'm happy to go down that rabbit hole if you like, but I'm not as against it as what I was maybe a year or two ago.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because obviously, that comes up a lot as a question, like, can I drop weight quickly and then level off? Is it more of a psychological thing? They see results, so they stick with it, versus the slow and steady. And I guess it probably depends on the client, right? Their mindset, their expectations. Are there other things you look forward to in determining that, or maybe you could tell us a bit more about your study?
Yeah. So what I've come to appreciate is, and I can get into the details of our study, whenever, and this is what I used to focus on, there's some very negative consequences with aggressive approaches to dieting. And usually what that manifests itself as in my world is fat overshoot. And that's a condition where somebody loses a lot of fat because of crash dieting, lost a lot of body weight. They also lost a lot of muscle tissue. And then after their diet's over, within a very short period of time, they gain a lot of weight back and a lot of body fat, so much so that they actually have more body fat gained on their body than what they had before they started their aggressive diet. That's been shown multiple times. And that's what I would base my opinion on. I'm like, hey, I can show you these 4 or 5 studies that have this consistent fat overshoot outcome. What did they all have in common? Aggressive, kind of low protein, no resistance training types of approaches to weight loss. And then in our study, what we did, we had our subjects that were resistance training, we had them continue to resistance train, and we had them reduce their calories by nearly 40%, so 37.5% for 14 days. And that's fairly aggressive. Again, it could be more aggressive, but that's, other research would suggest that's going to cause lean tissue loss. But we also have to appreciate this. We threw everything at them that we could that would at least help maintain their lean tissue. And what is that? High protein. So if the subjects in the study were eating 1 gram per pound of body weight, so I weigh about 200 pounds. That means I would have had to have eaten 200 grams of protein.
Right.
And we also had them continue to resistance train. And what we found after the end of the 2 weeks was 2 things. We found that they did lose more fat-free mass than we would have liked, but that was a short-sighted assessment. We also measured their body water changes. And when we factored in how much body water they lost, what we realized is they maintained almost all of their lean tissue during these 2 weeks. And that made me appreciate all of these other studies that showed these negative consequences didn't assess body water either. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't lose lean tissue. It just means that we couldn't determine how much was water and how much was actual lean tissue. The other thing that I noticed was all of these negative consequences from these crash diets, these aggressive diets, were elongated. They were 8 weeks long, 3 months long, 6 months long, Minnesota starvation experiment being one of them.
Right.
And when you look at the data, one of them being from my lab, which we hope to publish soon, if you can keep this aggressive, and I would say extreme dieting for a very short period of time, and I would say no more than 2 weeks and maybe even less than that, and if you're resistance training and if you're having a high protein, I feel the evidence now would suggest to me, now that I'm aware of other research, including my own, you can do this in a way that you will not have the negative outcomes that we historically would attribute to them. So I think the key is length,
right,
and the resistance training and protein. And again, I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. So
right.
you're literally catching me as I'm changing the dogma of my own thinking on this.
No, that's awesome, and that lends credence to your savvy and your willingness to learn. I mean, same with me. I've changed my mind on things through the years. I think we all should. We should be open to that. So, speaking of that, before, this is not to get off topic, but you hear about this, of course, in the fitness, bodybuilding, lower community. But when you have people that are dropping like that, what either a moderate or a severe caloric deficit, when obviously maintaining strength training is key. Have you seen this, or have you done studies showing how they do their strength training? A lot of people will say, as you go through, you're cutting calories, so you're going to have less strength, so you should do, lighter weights, more reps. Others say, no, don't stay with the light, as heavy as you can to maintain muscle mass, et cetera. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, so I can say what we've done in our research studies that where we've reported multiple times where muscle tissue is maintained throughout the dieting process. And what we focus on, we don't really give an allowance for reducing the volume or the intensity. So it's pretty much do what you can to maintain what you've been doing before the diet. And the most important thing with that is the intensity. And I define intensity as the proximity of a set that you would take to failure. So it's always important to take each set that you're doing, not counting your warm-up sets, to near failure. You do not have to go to absolute failure. And let me just explain this for somebody that might not know. If you're doing a bench press with 200 pounds and you can do it 10 times, if you tried to do it an 11th time, the bar would get stuck on your chest. You could not do an 11th rep. That means that set you should be doing 8, maybe 9 repetitions, because that is near failure. And what that does, if you look at just like muscle physiology, there's something called the size principle. And essentially, when you go to near failure, you're recruiting all of the available motor units that you can to complete that lift, because you have smaller motor units, typically type 1 muscle fibers. They're fatiguing as you're getting closer to failure. And that now forces your muscle, your brain and muscles, to recruit more motor units to continue lifting. So by going close to failure, you are recruiting as many motor units or as many muscle fibers as you can. And the only fibers that are going to adapt are those that have been activated or recruited. So that's why it's very important to go to near failure on each set. And stating this another way, you are maximizing the muscle protein synthetic response during that set. And that's what resistance training is. You're trying to maximize the anabolic stimulus during that workout. And that workout happens to be on a set by set, I like to say muscle group by muscle group basis.
Perfect. No, I love that answer. Thank you. And speaking of, I definitely want to come back to some more fat loss question, but while we're on the muscle topic, what's your take on, or have you seen much studies in terms of like, when clients going through like actually switching or transforming like muscle fiber types, if they're doing mixing up their training regimens, making more of a fast twitch, making more fast twitch muscle fibers from slow twitch and vice versa, etc. Have you seen much or heard or studied much about that?
I did study that and kind of had a focus on that in grad school. So we used to do muscle biopsies in some of our training studies. And what and again, I haven't done this since I've graduated, but you're not able to create new muscle fibers. So you're not able to, through training, produce new type 2X or type 2A. What you do is you kind of you transform the muscle fibers to resemble a slower twitch or faster twitch fiber based on the type of training that you do. And one thing I'll just add to this, just because I think a lot of people go to you for longevity treatments, or just for you to help them with longevity. One thing that I used to teach strength and conditioning, and one thing that's been impressed upon me, as I look at people that are older, my grandparents when they were living, or just when I have to go to the hospital for whatever reason, visiting someone, I look at older people. One thing I notice is across the board, and I always tell my students to look at this. What do you see about an older person? And it's that they're slow. Mm-hmm. Their walking is slow. They're going up the stairs slow. And we know that sarcopenia primarily targets type 2 muscle fibers. So those are our more powerful, our more force-generating muscle fibers.
Right.
So how do you target them? Well, that's through one would be lifting heavy weights. So you want lifting heavy weights helps. But I think even more important for longevity or being more functional is explosive type movements. Right. The more explosive you are activating and stimulating these highest threshold motor units, type 2X fibers. And it makes sense in your training, do that. And what does that look like? Well, that's plyometrics. That's like clap push-ups, medicine ball throws. Anything that's explosive in nature helps you to retain a powerful body, and it keeps stimulating the muscle fibers that naturally get degraded or reduced with aging. So just a thought. I know that's kind of your one of your areas of expertise, but I thought I'd share just my thinking on that.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of, my enemy is sarcopenia, right? I'm all about, keeping that muscle. And you're right. I tell people that too, especially my female clients, like, don't be afraid to lift the heavy weights or swing the kettlebell, because I think, like you said, that explosive movement, that strength pattern is probably one of the first to go as you get older. You can maintain some endurance capacity, but I think that power is more power and speed, like you said, that fast twitch fiber. So I think it's massively important to focus on that. So now what about I mean, I know you have in terms of like men versus women, because I have both. I know you have studied both as well. What about training differences especially for men versus women? Like you hear of different protocols, more say you want to focus more on a female, your mid 40s, 50, whatever, female trying to lose weight, maintain, or even build some muscle. There's been a ton of studies on that in terms of what they can do, their capacity for, strength compared to men. They have more of a growth hormone, burn fat kind of metabolism. So how do you change up the regimens, or have you done any studies comparing different, in other words, like what's the best kind of strength training protocol for a woman looking to, build the muscle, burn the fat kind of thing?
Yeah, and I'll have to couch this with, my research has been on younger females and younger males. So within that population, we do not change anything about our resistance training programming. So I'm not convinced that the muscle protein synthetic response, which that's going to be the largest variable for determining a muscle hypertrophic response over time. I'm just not convinced or aware that there's any different mechanism for adaptation between a female and a male.
Gotcha.
Now, that's for young people. If I'm working with females in menopause, perimenopause, I need to be open to the idea that maybe that's not as cut and dry as it is in younger. So I don't know, because I don't work with that population, but I have a respect for my ignorance in that area, that I don't want to just say blanket, yes, everybody should train the same throughout their entire lifespan. They may, but I have too much to learn about female physiology in the 50s, 60s, which wouldn't, I just wouldn't be as confident in my recommendation with that age group.
Yes, as we all know, women are more complicated. Good. And then I guess on the flip side of that, in terms of with your protocols, in terms of as you mentioned, I agree with you. Strength training should be the bread and butter. Caloric deficit or not, or adding more protein. And then in terms of cardio, same kind of question in that regard. Obviously, it's great to, I guess, kind of sprinkle that in, right? And same thing, a long slow cardio versus HIIT style training. And especially men versus women. Again, any differences? What are your thoughts on I guess adding those two components in as well?
Yeah, I tend to go with client preference. So if they prefer high intensity, then let's do high intensity. If you prefer more steady state, then let's lean into your natural inclinations. And one of the, I guess, phrases I use is I try to help people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. And what I found that helps it be maintainable is to lean into your natural preferences, whether that be for specific foods or different types of exercise. Now, of course, I'm going to say you should be resistance training. And if somebody were to say, well, I don't want to resistance train, and you just said I should lean into what I like, and I'm saying, okay, but just understand then what you're leaving on the table. You are not going to build as much muscle. You're going to lose strength. You're going to be at greater risk for sarcopenia. You can make that choice, but your choices have consequences. But at the end of the day, if you hate resistance training, you're not going to do it anyway. Let me know that, so that we can do some other, as we just talked about, maybe some plyometric explosive type movements where you're still getting a type 2X muscle fiber stimulus on your muscle groups.
Right.
I think cardio is very underutilized well, actually, it's kind of both. New fitness people have too much faith in cardio for fat loss. They think, oh, I have to run to lose fat. You don't. And then on the other side of the equation, I think the pendulum has swung too far, where people who are a little bit more resistance trained minded want to avoid cardio at all costs.
Right.
And I think there you're not realizing the powerful fat loss stimulus that aerobic exercise has, plus all of the health benefits as well.
Absolutely.
And I'll add in this for a formerly sedentary person to do some cardio along with their caloric restriction, that will cause them to maintain a lot more of their lean mass, and they'll lose, and I'll just say nearly, if not 100% of their body weight will come from body fat stores, even if they're doing cardio. And again, this is in a previously untrained individual. Historically, people have looked at comparing diet versus cardio, and they're like, well, diet's always better. Cardio is almost worthless for weight loss. And that's an immature look at that research, because what we see is dieting alone does cause more body weight loss, but it's lean tissue and fat tissue. And when you if you just look at using aerobic activity for fat loss, all of the weight loss is coming from fat mass. So yes, it's less total weight, but it's just as much, if not more, body fat loss. And again, then you get all of the other benefits: insulin sensitivity improvement,
Right.
anxiety control, like all of those other benefits that a lot of my younger people don't care about, but nonetheless, they're there. So cardio, I think, is overly, it's negative in some and overly optimistic in others. And I wish we could live in where the value is.
I think you're right. It's funny. I've seen and read and heard the same kind of, discussions. One people like, oh, you don't have to cardio at all, just lift and you'll be fine. Others, like you said, and of course, nowadays it's like sometimes it gets taken too far, right? People are like, well, I got to do CrossFit, Orange Theory, and hit like 7 days a week, and lift. And like, okay, now you're doing too much. Back it down. So you get, like you said, you got to find that sweet spot. So
yes.
Now, if you're with your fat loss studies, are you mostly just targeting just fat loss in general, or say like more abdominal, visceral adiposity reduction versus peripheral, or both?
I would say our intent going in is to target total body fat, and we don't really look at visceral. I mean, we have an in body, but I'm not convinced that the numbers are valid. They may be, but we also use ultrasound, so we're actually measuring the thickness of the fat loss that actually happens. So our emphasis going in is twofold: total body fat loss, so adipose tissue loss, but with a very strategic emphasis on maintaining as much lean tissue as possible.
Right.
So we do not look at either of them in a vacuum. The primary goal is fat loss. The secondary, but just behind the primary goal, is we want to do this in a way where we're not losing lean tissue.
Right.
And I would say, even if you do lose lean tissue, it's not gone forever.
Right.
It comes back usually, within a few weeks. So it's not like you've damaged your entire life if you do lose lean tissue. But there are other consequences that happen when you lose lean tissue. And yes, let's say you can get it back in a month, but you lost all of that time when you were dieting, plus the time after, just to get it back to where it was. And that's all that time that you didn't have any opportunity to build new muscle. So I don't want to minimize it either.
Right. So you're doing a lot of, I was going to ask you about imaging modalities in terms of, obviously people do like in-bodies, DEXAs, you said ultrasound, MRIs, a little bit. What you've been mostly doing, the DEXA, or I'm sorry, in-bodies you said, and ultrasound?
Yeah, so our primary mode is ultrasound, because what I like about that is you're literally measuring adipose tissue. With any other device, other than skin folds, you're not measuring adipose tissue. Bod pod, you're measuring air displacement. DEXA, you're measuring pixels on a screen, if we're going to get technical.
Right.
Underwater weighing, you're measuring water displacement. In body, you're measuring how fast an electrical current goes through the body. So all of those other devices, while they're good, they're not actually measuring fat loss.
Right.
Ultrasound does. Ultrasound literally gives you the thickness of the fat tissue today, and then after dieting, it'll tell you how much it went down. We use a multifactorial approach. So we use ultrasound, in body, and we recently got a bod pod. So we use a lot, but ultrasound would be the one that is the most intuitive, and it's the one that I like with my population, which are lean people that are getting leaner.
Yep.
because that's it, again, a few millimeters here and a few millimeters there. It's sensitive enough to detect that.
And are they doing a standard scan on everybody, like a certain, arms and legs, abdomen, everything, like multiple measurements, or how do they track that?
Yes. So what we do is we use the standard 7 sites from the Jackson Pollock skinfold equation. So
Okay.
if anybody ever had an exercise science background, you've probably done the Jackson Pollock. So it's the same 7 sites that you would use on a standard skinfold assessment. And we just do the same 7 sites with an ultrasound wand that's portable, that gives us, skin folds are very, very similar. It's just not quite as precise, and there's a little bit more technician skill with skin folds than ultrasound.
Right. Perfect. Okay. How often do you deal with, diet breaks, or patients or clients that have, what they call plateaus, or quote unquote, you hear about people talking about metabolic adaptation, or like I said, plateaus. So how often do you deal with that, or have you studied that in terms of, okay, now it's time for a diet break or something else?
Yeah, we've done 2 diet break or diet refeed diet break studies. So that was had been a focus of our lab. And the whole concept of a weight loss plateau, it's very intriguing. And I'll just share what the research would suggest. And I'll break it. I'll share what the research says, but I'll present it in a way that also includes my opinion. So if I'm working with somebody that's relatively new to fitness, new to dieting, new to exercising, and I'm working with them and helping them lose body weight with diet and exercise, and they are claiming that that they're not able to lose body weight, that they are experiencing a plateau, I would hypothesize that that's likely because they're not following the diet, that they're not adhering to the caloric deficit.
Right.
I believe that, again, doesn't mean that has to be the case, but that's likely the reason.
Right.
If we're working with somebody who's pretty lean, this would be like a bodybuilder, physique athlete, and they've been dieting for a while and they are no longer losing body weight, I would be more inclined to think that's metabolic adaptation. Your body will only get so lean. And I think we can appreciate the leaner you get, the more the body starts to put up defenses to take it back to homeostasis. And it also works in the other way as well. The more excess body fat you have, the more the body will try to keep you from gaining more body fat. So the question is, if somebody's claiming a weight loss plateau, we have to ask the question, is this because you're not following the plan? Or is this because your body has adapted to the deficit such that now what was once a caloric deficit is now not, because your metabolic rate has been lowered?
Yep.
And that's just going to be the art and science of working with patients or working with clients.
Right.
The one takeaway with that is I would impress upon people that work with weight loss clients who are experiencing a weight loss plateau is to don't assume that they are following the plan. Let's make sure that you're doing all of your checks to make sure that that's not the case. Once you have very high confidence that they actually are following what should be a caloric deficit and they're not responding, okay, now that can introduce a bunch of different strategies to help kickstart future fat loss. And I think one of the common approaches would be a diet break, a diet refeed, where we're saying, let's pause. Let's go back to what we believe should be your maintenance calories, where you shouldn't gain weight, but you're no longer actively dieting.
Right.
And at least in practice, the research, we don't have research on this level of nuance where somebody hasn't been the diet, all of the diet break research, including my own, it's very standard. Subjects diet for X amount of time, 4 weeks, then they take a month or a 2-week break, or 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, with no real appreciation for were they actually in a plateau. It's very hard to standardize that in a research study. So there's a little disconnect between what we do in the lab and how we would want to do this in real life.
Yep. Gotcha. No, perfect answer. Thank you. Do you have an opinion or take on, or studies that, obviously, fasting's big nowadays. Do you have many people that come to you asking about fasting or time restricted feeding, et cetera? What's your take on that, and when to use that as a tool?
Yeah, I have an informed opinion based on the research evidence, and this is limited to fat loss or body composition.
Sure.
So the evidence there, and this is from a handful of studies in humans, would suggest that it's intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding. Let's just say where you're skipping a meal, eating in a 12 to 6 or a 6 to 8 hour window. Two things: it's not helping with fat loss any more than what a caloric deficit that it would be providing.
Right.
So if you are, let's say you're not eating breakfast and that's saving you 600 calories, whether you took those 600 calories from dinner, lunch, or just reduced 200 calories at each meal, there is no additional benefit of time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting for fat loss above and beyond what caloric deficit it is causing. The other thing is, when you shrink the window and your protein feedings get to be, let's just say, 2 times per day, now we can confidently say, based on 2 studies that I'm aware of, you are not maximizing your muscle hypertrophic adaptation to your resistance training.
Right.
So 1 or 2 protein feedings is not ideal when compared to at least 3, if not 4, maybe even 5. Now, I want to also say, I just said all of this with the very specific focus on body composition.
Right.
Maybe there are other benefits to digestion, to sleep, to metabolic health. I have not exhaustively looked at that literature, so I wouldn't comment on that. But generally speaking, time restricted feeding is not optimizing your body composition. And let me also say, that being said, I don't really call it time restricted feeding, but I kind of follow it. I don't eat breakfast. I don't eat till like 10 o'clock, sometimes 11 o'clock, because I'm not hungry.
Right.
Um, my my I struggle with hunger or wanting to eat too much food. So I've learned, don't eat when I'm not hungry. Let me bank those calories
Right.
when I'm more hungry. So to me, it just, again, you could rightfully call what I do a time restricted feeding approach.
Right.
And it works for me. It works for me because it helps me to not gain as much fat. But I also appreciate, yeah, I probably should have a protein feeding to maximize, or at my age, maintain my muscle mass.
Right. Right. Now, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's kind of what I talk with my patients about too, is that, like you mentioned, maybe having 1 or 2 meals. A lot of people talk about doing, 1 meal a day, that kind of thing. And like you said, maybe for longevity, or like you said, gut health, there's other reasons we would do that. But you're right. I don't think it's optimal for, um, fat loss or body composition, because you just can't absorb that much protein. At least I can't. I can't eat. I kind of tend to be more like the traditional old school bodybuilder, eating like 4 or 5 smaller meals, because that's just me. When I eat a huge meal, I just get really bloated, and some people are like that. So other people can do 1 or 2 meals a day, but um,
Yeah.
same thing with like the whole take. I think you did a research or a study, or maybe it was in your Body by Science, about the thermic effect of food. In terms of, we've kind of I guess debunked what I was just talking about. Eating 6 meals a day, you're going to burn more calories is breaking down that food, versus not. It's probably not a big difference. Or versus like uh, nutrient partitioning, right? So if you eat more protein and carbs, you're gonna burn more up with that thermic effect of food, versus eating a lot of high of fat. But other people are saying no, cut back on the carbs first. And I think I've heard you say that it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting in a deficit, whether you cut carbs or you cut fat, I guess. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll lay out our strategy. So we prioritize protein. So let's just say you're going to eat a gram per pound. So that's going to be X amount of calories. And then you're going to have whatever amount of calories remaining that would still have you in a caloric deficit.
Right.
I have the opinion, based on evidence, it doesn't matter if those calories come from fat or carbs. Now, I would say it makes sense to avoid extremes if you're trying to optimize body composition. And by avoiding extremes, avoid a ketogenic diet if your goal is to maximize muscle mass, we have cellular data and we have applied data in humans to suggest that a ketogenic diet will not optimize an anabolic adaptation to resistance training. We also know that if fat levels get too low, if you're trying to eliminate almost all dietary fat, that it also is not ideal for body composition adaptations. So it's somewhere, the way that I describe it is, if you find yourself liking more carbs like my wife, then for your remaining calories, choose foods that are more carbs. If you enjoy higher fat foods, maybe like I do, I like bacon. I that's something that I enjoy, or buffalo wings.
Yeah.
Then choose to fill more of your calories from more foods that are higher in fat. So you'll kind of see this trend. Just I'm leaning into what people want to naturally do, and kind of putting up some guidelines, some strategies. Hey, here's the overall strategy, but within this, do what you would normally do so that it's not as much of a burden, and that you can do this in a more sustainable manner.
Right. Perfect. Awesome. So what are your current projects and upcoming projects for 23, 24?
So one thing that we talked about, my next month in Body by Science, I found an article where the subjects lost a pound of fat a day. So
Wow.
yeah, it's extreme. It's extreme, but I
I'm looking
found
forward
it.
to reading that.
Yeah, it's cool. It was a really well done study too. It wasn't. Yeah, sometimes those studies can get a little crazy, but so that's something I just finished. What my research team and I are working on is we're doing a systematic review and meta-analysis where we're comparing what's optimal for fat loss. Is it aerobic or resistance training? So literally going head to head. And we're only including the studies that had these three groups: an aerobic only group, a resistance training only group, and then a concurrent training group. And the reason they're only including those is we believe, and I guess it's logical, those studies that included those three groups, they're designed in a way that makes them best able to answer that question. Because in many of those studies, they tried to match the time that they spent, or match the calories that were expended from the aerobic or the resistance exercise. So by only including the studies that actually had those three groups, we are going to answer that question with the best available studies. What I don't like about a lot of these systematic reviews, they'll answer a question, but they'll pull from studies that had no intention of even asking or trying to answer that question.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of noise. And in our studies, it was almost always the case that the researchers were wanting to investigate weight loss, or in some cases muscle hypertrophy, but where they at least measured body fat losses.
Gotcha.
So I think this will be the first study that's ever been done to compare the two in a systematic review and meta-analysis approach. Other things that we're finishing is that, like I said, the rapid fat loss study. And my research team, we're about to start our semester, so we're meeting to make decisions on what we're going to do this next year. So I don't have an answer as to exactly what we're going to be doing after this systematic review, but we'll have those decisions soon.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. One question I always like to ask everyone: is there anything? I don't know if you're a reader or not. Is there any non-medical, non-sciencey, non-body composition books or journals or anything that you're reading right now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So I kind of look at my my research review. I've always really appreciated entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you're a medical professional, but I assume you run your own clinic.
Yeah, I read a lot of entrepreneurship books too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm always reading that kind of personal development, business, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. What do you read?
Yeah. So I'm trying to get, well, I won't pull it out, but it's called, it's Alex Hormozy. Have you ever heard of that name? Have you
Yeah.
ever heard of him?
Uh-huh.
I think it's called $100 million offer. So it's just I'm really into this content marketing, digital marketing, email marketing, like just that part of it.
Right.
Again, I always, like I said, I just, I appreciate entrepreneurs so much. I'm not cut out for it. I need a steady paycheck. And I don't have the capacity for risk. So what you do, again, you're kind of like me in the sense that you're a healthcare professional, but yet your your income is tied to how good you are at
Right.
running a business and marketing it. And
Right.
I kind of say I dabble in that, but I really, really enjoy that stuff. So copywriting is the next book I'm going to do some reading on. And
Nice.
actually, my first job or my first degree was marketing. It was just,
Okay.
I'm old enough that it was a little pre-internet, almost like the internet was just starting. So it was a totally different world.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah.
what are you reading? What's something you're reading right now?
Yeah, so I'm always reading like 3 or 4 books at the same time. My wife always laughs at me. She's like, I don't know how you do that, but so I'm always reading, something medical, of course, but at night I try to read something, relaxing or personal development. I just picked up a book called 10X, Not 2X. It's a compilation, 2 authors. Of course, I'm total brain farting right now, but Dan Sullivan co-authored it. He's a big entrepreneurship. He coaches entrepreneurs. He's a big guy. Dan Sullivan and Dr. Oh my God, I'm total brain farting right now. But 10X, not 2X. It's basically
Okay.
as an entrepreneur, how to basically scale up by doing less. So um, it's an interesting
Ah,
it's an interesting
I love
concept.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I like that. That's one of my core values for my research team is to be simple. Like,
yeah,
do
yeah.
not like what's the phrase? Complexity is the enemy of execution.
Exactly right. So it's an interesting reading that, and I'm reading some of the. I picked up about a bunch of the classics off Amazon. So I'm reading. Let's see, I just finished a book by Robert Louis Stevenson called Kidnapped, and then I read Into the Wild, and then right now I'm reading Hemingway, one of Hemingway's books right now, For Whom the Bell Tolls. So just trying to read some of those too, just kind of broaden things out a little bit. So
Yes. Yeah. I
yeah.
love it.
So before I forget, plug. I got to wrap things up here. So if you want to plug your website, your research review, anything else you want to shout out, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. My research review, I summarize 2 articles every month, and I would love to have you be one of my expert contributors if you're ever willing to do that.
Sure, love
I
to.
love your background and expertise. So I summarize 2 research articles every month, solely focused on fat loss and muscle building. In addition to that, I bring in 2 experts. Usually they're physique coaches to help us apply that research because I'm a
Right,
scientist. And the most valuable part of what that is the application that I bring in experts to do.
right.
Um, so if anybody's interested in that, it's billcampbellphd.com. That's my website. And then I also recently launched the Physique Coaching Academy with Dr. Lane Norton and Clean Health Fitness. So that's our course to help fitness professionals who want to specialize in body composition clients or weight loss clients.
Nice, awesome. Thank you. All right,
Yeah.
well, I've got to wrap it up. So thank you so much, Bill. I really enjoyed this. I could talk for you for probably another hour, I'm sure. So maybe we'll get you back on again.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love an hour to ask you questions. I don't have a podcast to do it in, but
Absolutely.
I just
Anytime.
have a lot of respect for your knowledge and expertise. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Bill Campbell. We'll get everything information and spread it out. So thanks for jumping on here. Appreciate it.